In the wizarding world, power is not always obvious. It isn't just the spells you can cast or the duels you can win. Sometimes, the most powerful witches and wizards are the ones others speak about carefully, and in certain cases, the ones the Ministry could not afford to ignore. Because power, in the wizarding world, is rarely just one thing. It can be knowledge, influence, innovation, or the ability to change how magic itself is understood. And while many witches and wizards have been talented, only a few have shaped events in ways that force the Ministry to take notice, not always with approval, and not always in time. Because in some cases, power does not just draw the Ministry's attention, it forces it to respond. And sometimes, that influence doesn't come from force at all. Number 10. Newt Scamander. Newt Scamander is not the first name most would associate with power. He was not known for dueling, he did not seek political influence, and he showed little interest in authority for its own sake. But power does not always announce itself loudly. Newt was a magizoologist, a specialist in magical creatures, at a time when many were misunderstood, feared, or simply dismissed as dangerous. Through his work, he documented species others avoided, challenged long-held assumptions, and helped reshape how magical creatures were classified and treated. His book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, became a foundational text, not just for students, but for the Ministry itself. Because once knowledge spreads, it becomes influence, and influence, when applied correctly, changes policy. The Ministry's approach to magical creatures did not shift overnight, but figures like Newt made it impossible for it to remain the same, which makes his form of power easy to overlook, not aggressive, not political, but quietly transformative. Because while others forced the Ministry to react, Newt changed how it thought. And not all forms of power are so subtle. Number 9. Minerva McGonagall. Minerva McGonagall is not often described as one of the most powerful witches of her time. Not because she lacks ability, but because she rarely chooses to display it unnecessarily. A professor of transfiguration and later headmistress of Hogwarts, she is known for precision, discipline, and a level of control that few ever question. But long before she became a defining presence within the castle, McGonagall was already operating at a level that drew wider attention. She trained and worked within the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement early in her career, gaining experience in a system that values both competence and discretion. And it is that combination which makes her particularly difficult to measure. Because power, in her case, is not expressed through unpredictability, but through consistency. She does not escalate situations unnecessarily, she does not rely on reputation alone, and she does not make mistakes lightly, which is precisely why, when she does act, it carries weight. During moments of crisis, McGonagall is not the loudest voice in the room, but she is often the one others look to once the situation becomes serious. A strategist, a protector, and a witch capable of adapting faster than most would expect, which places her in a unique position, not feared in the same way as others on this list, but respected in a way that tends to last longer. Because, while some forms of power force attention, others earn it, and few witches of her era have done so more completely. But not everyone who earned the Ministry's attention did so by following its rules. Number 8. Severus Snape. Severus Snape is not easily defined. To some, he was a loyal professor, to others, something far less certain. And that uncertainty may be the most important detail of all. Because Snape's power was never obvious, it was not announced or displayed without purpose, it was built quietly. As a student, he showed an unusual aptitude for potion making, refining methods, improving results, and even developing spells of his own, which, already placed him ahead of most of his peers. But knowledge alone does not draw the Ministry's attention. Application does. And Snape's ability to operate within multiple worlds at once made him something far more difficult to categorize. A teacher, a skilled occlumens, a figure trusted in places where trust was not easily given. He was able to conceal intent, control information, and navigate situations where others would have been exposed almost immediately, which is a different kind of power entirely. Not force, not influence, but precision. The ability to act without revealing what that action truly means. And that is what made Snape so significant. Because, while others shaped events from the outside, he altered them from within, quietly, carefully, and often without recognition. Which is perhaps why his role was never fully understood until much later. Because some forms of power are not meant to be seen in the moment, only in the outcome. And not everyone who drew the Ministry's attention did so from within its reach. Number 7. Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley Shacklebolt is what power looks like when it is recognized. Not whispered about, not hidden, but trusted. An Auror by profession, Kingsley operated within the Ministry of Magic at a level where competence alone was not enough. Precision, judgment, and reliability were expected, not praised. And yet, even within that environment, he stood apart. He was tasked with responsibilities that required both skill and discretion, trusted to act without hesitation and to assess situations others could not easily resolve, which placed him in a position few witches or wizards ever reach. Not just capable, but dependable. And that distinction matters, because while many on this list gained the Ministry's attention through disruption, Kingsley earned it through stability. During periods of uncertainty, when leadership faltered and trust became difficult to place, he was one of the few figures others could rely on without question. A protector, a strategist, and eventually a leader at the very center of the system itself, which makes his form of power particularly significant, not because it forced the Ministry to react, but because it helped define what the Ministry became. And that is a rarer form of influence than most realize, because some witches and wizards shape events from the outside, while others reshape the structure from within. Number 6. Rowena Ravenclaw. Rowena Ravenclaw is not remembered for conflict, nor for conquest, nor for the kind of power that draws immediate attention. And yet, her influence may be among the most far-reaching of any witch in the wizarding world. Long before the Ministry of Magic took shape, before formal systems, regulations, or oversight, Ravenclaw helped establish something far more enduring, a place of learning, a structure where magical ability could be refined, understood, and passed on. As one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, her contribution was not simply in creating a school, but in shaping how magic itself would be approached. Intelligence, curiosity, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. These were not just values, they became standards. And standards, over time, become systems, which means that much of what the Ministry would later regulate, classify, and attempt to control can be traced back to the foundations laid by witches like Ravenclaw. Her most well-known creation, the diadem, was said to enhance the wisdom of its wearer, a reflection of the importance she placed on understanding over force. But perhaps her greatest influence is less visible, because knowledge, once established, rarely remains contained. It spreads, it evolves, and eventually it shapes the world around it, which makes Ravenclaw's power difficult to measure, not immediate, not aggressive, but enduring. Because, while others forced the wizarding world to react, she helped define how it would think. And not all influence fades with time. Now, it's easy to think of power as something obvious, the spells you can cast, the battles you can win, the reputation you leave behind. But as we've seen, that's only part of the story. Because the Ministry does not respond to all power in the same way. Some it studies, some it respects, and some it simply tries to survive. And few figures illustrate that shift more clearly than the next name on this list. Number 5. Salazar Slytherin. Salazar Slytherin is not remembered quietly. Unlike Ravenclaw, whose influence spread through knowledge, Slytherin's legacy is defined by division. As one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, he helped establish the very institution that would go on to shape the wizarding world. But from the beginning, his vision was not shared by all. Slytherin believed that magic should be taught selectively, that it should remain within certain families, and that opening it too widely carried risks others were not prepared to accept. It was a position that created conflict, not just in theory, but in practice, and eventually it led to his departure from the castle he helped build. But Slytherin did not simply leave. He ensured that something of his remained behind. The Chamber of Secrets, hidden within Hogwarts itself, a structure designed not for teaching but for judgment, and guarded by something few would be capable of controlling, which makes his influence particularly difficult to ignore. Because while others contributed to Hogwarts as a place of learning, Slytherin embedded something else entirely. A mechanism, a message, and a belief that would echo long after he was gone. One that others, generations later, would attempt to follow with consequences the Ministry could not afford to overlook. Which is what makes his power so significant, not just in what he achieved, but in what continued to unfold because of it. Because some witches and wizards shape the world in their lifetime, others shape it long after they've left it. Number 4. Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Lestrange is not a name spoken lightly, not because it is unknown, but because it carries a certain expectation, chaos, precision, and a willingness to act where others hesitate. From an early stage, Bellatrix demonstrated exceptional magical ability. Her control, speed, and confidence in spellwork placed her among the most capable witches of her generation. But ability alone does not define her. It is how she chose to use it. Bellatrix aligned herself completely with a cause that operated in direct opposition to the Ministry of Magic. Not cautiously, not reluctantly, but entirely. And that level of commitment made her particularly dangerous. Because while others might calculate risk, Bellatrix removed hesitation from the equation altogether. She did not second guess. She did not hold back. And she did not appear concerned with consequences in the way others might be, which made her presence difficult to predict and even harder to contain. The Ministry did not simply take notice of Bellatrix Lestrange, it was forced to respond to her again and again. And yet, what makes her power so distinctive is not just her capability, but her certainty, a complete belief in her actions, regardless of outcome. Because while many powerful witches and wizards shape events through influence or control, Bellatrix did so through momentum, fast, unrelenting, and often impossible to redirect once it began. Which is why she stands apart, not simply as a powerful witch, but as a force that others had to account for, whether they were prepared or not. And yet, even Bellatrix's influence was part of something larger. Because the next name on this list did not just challenge the Ministry, he forced it to confront a far greater threat. Number 3. Gellert Grindelwald. Gellert Grindelwald did not simply challenge the wizarding world. He attempted to redefine it. Long before his name became associated with conflict, Grindelwald was recognized for his intellect, his ambition, and his willingness to explore forms of magic others considered too dangerous to pursue. Even as a student, his ideas set him apart, not just in ability, but in direction. Because Grindelwald was not interested in mastering magic as it existed, he was interested in what it could become, and, more importantly, who should control it. His philosophy, that magical society should operate above the non-magical world, was not simply theoretical. It was something he intended to act upon, which transformed him from a thinker into a figure the wider wizarding world could not ignore. His influence spread beyond a single country, beyond a single institution, until it reached a scale that demanded a coordinated response. And at that point, the Ministry was no longer observing, it was reacting. Because Grindelwald's power was not built on unpredictability, like Bellatrix, nor on secrecy, like Snape. It was built on belief, a clear, structured vision of how the world should function, and the determination to bring that vision into reality, which made him extraordinarily difficult to oppose. Because when power is supported by conviction, it becomes something more than ability. It becomes momentum, and momentum, once established, is not easily stopped, which is why Grindelwald's actions forced the wizarding world to respond at a level it had rarely faced before. And yet, even that level of influence had its limits, because the next name on this list did not just challenge the wizarding world, he changed how it understood fear. Number 2. Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle is not remembered for subtlety, though in the beginning that is exactly how he operated. Intelligent, composed, and highly capable, he was recognized early as a wizard of exceptional promise, a student who excelled, a presence that drew attention for all the right reasons, which makes what followed far more significant. Because Riddle did not simply develop power, he pursued it, deliberately, relentlessly, and without the limitations others might accept. His understanding of magic extended into areas few were willing to explore, not just to learn, but to control. And over time, that pursuit transformed him into something else entirely. A figure no longer operating within the expectations of the wizarding world, but outside of them, which is when the Ministry's role changed. Because it was no longer observing a powerful individual, it was responding to a threat that affected every part of magical society. Systems disrupted, authority challenged, stability replaced with uncertainty, and all of it centered around a single name: Voldemort. His influence was not just widespread, it was invasive. It altered behavior, changed alliances, and forced even the most capable witches and wizards to act differently, which is what makes his power so significant, not just in what he could do, but in what others believed he might do next. Because fear, when it reaches that level, becomes a force in its own right. And yet, even at the height of that influence, there remained one figure the wizarding world turned to anyway. Not because he was louder, not because he was feared, but because he was trusted. Number 1. Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore is rarely introduced as one of the most powerful wizards of his time, because by the point his name is mentioned, that fact is already understood. His ability was never in question. From an early age, Dumbledore demonstrated a level of magical talent that set him apart, not just from his peers, but from expectations entirely. His work in Transfiguration, his discoveries, and his contributions to magical understanding established him as a figure the wider wizarding world could not ignore. But ability alone does not explain his position. Because Dumbledore's influence extended far beyond what he could do, it extended into what he chose not to do. Positions of authority were offered and declined, power was available and set aside. Which is far more difficult than it sounds, because power is easiest to recognize when it is used, not when it is restrained. Influence was constant, but rarely used without purpose, which created something unusual, a wizard whose strength was recognized without needing to be demonstrated. The Ministry did not simply take notice of Dumbledore, it deferred to him, because when situations escalated beyond control, when threats reached a level others could not contain, he was the figure they relied on. Not out of obligation, but out of understanding. Because Dumbledore's power was not built on fear, like Voldemort, nor on ideology, like Grindelwald. It was built on mastery, of magic, of judgment, and perhaps most importantly, of restraint. which is what truly set him apart. Because in a world where power is often defined by how far it is pushed, Dumbledore proved something far more difficult, that the greatest power may lie in choosing not to use it at all, and that is something the Ministry could never afford to ignore. Power in the wizarding world is rarely as simple as it first appears. It isn't just the spells a witch or wizard can cast or the reputation they leave behind. Sometimes it's influence, sometimes it's belief, and sometimes the kind of power the Ministry never fully managed to control or contain. Which does leave one question. When you think about it, who truly belongs at the top of a list like this? And just as importantly, who doesn't? Let me know what you think and who you would have included. And if you find yourself drawn to the more curious corners of the wizarding world, you may want to stay a little longer. There's always more to uncover if you happen to be looking when the clock strikes odd.